Have you ever had a moment that cracked your world wide open, so sudden, so sharp, that it made you question everything you thought you knew about yourself? I did, and I remember the exact night it happened. It was 2:17 a.m. The house was silent, but my thoughts were screaming. I sat on the floor of my bedroom closet, knees pulled to my chest, holding my breath like it would keep the pain from spilling out. I had just found out someone I trusted, someone I had loved, had betrayed me in a way I never saw coming. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was identity shattering. I wasn't crying anymore. I was past that. I was numb, empty. I stared at the beige carpet like it held answers, like it might speak to me. But the only thing I heard was this quiet, deep voice inside. This isn't the end. This is the beginning. And somehow I believed it. Something shifted in me that night. I didn't have the language for it then. I just knew that whatever I had built my life on, approval, achievements, people-pleasing, it had just crumbled. And in the rubble, I found something strange. A small, persistent sense that I was being pulled into something more. Not louder, not bigger, just deeper. The days that followed weren't easy. I didn't wake up healed or hopeful, but I began to notice things. The way certain conversations drained me, the way some rooms suddenly felt too small, the way my old goals didn't fit me anymore, like a jacket I had outgrown. I wasn't depressed, I wasn't lost, I was just being unraveled. And somewhere in that unraveling, I started hearing it more clearly. You don't belong where you used to. At first I thought I was just being overly sensitive, but the more I listened, the more I realized I was being set apart. It wasn't punishment, it was preparation. And maybe, just maybe, you've felt that too. Maybe you've been wondering why life has felt so heavy, why people don't get you, why you're always the one who feels too much or asks too many questions. Maybe you've walked through some dark rooms and thought no one saw you in there. But what if the darkness wasn't there to hide you? What if it was there to protect you while you were being remade? Because looking back now, I can see it so clearly. I wasn't abandoned, I was chosen. Chosen to walk a different road. Chosen to carry a light that didn't make sense in rooms built on shadows. So if you're reading this, if something in your spirit is whispering, "This sounds like me," then maybe you're not crazy, lost, or broken. Maybe you're chosen too. There was a time when I thought I was completely shattered, not just emotionally bruised, but spiritually crushed. Like every dream I had, every prayer I whispered, had fallen through my hands like sand. It wasn't one single moment that broke me. It was a slow erosion. 1,000 paper cuts that turned into a deep internal wound. Rejection after rejection. Closed doors. Silent nights. Prayers that seemed to bounce off the ceiling. I remember sitting in my car outside a grocery store one afternoon. I had just received another, "We're sorry, but," email from a job I desperately wanted. I put my head on the steering wheel and said out loud, "God, why do you keep breaking me?" But I didn't get an answer that day, at least not the one I expected. Instead, over the weeks that followed, something began to unfold. It started small, like a seed pushing through concrete. I'd hear a lyric in a worship song that made me cry. I'd read a verse I had seen 100 times, but suddenly it hit differently. I wasn't being broken, I was being rebuilt. See, we don't realize it while it's happening. When the job doesn't work out, when the relationship falls apart, when everything we leaned on crumbles, it feels like destruction. But it's not. It's a holy reconstruction. God doesn't break to harm, He breaks to reshape, to reset the foundation, to remove what was never meant to stay. Maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've had nights where the silence was so loud, it echoed. Maybe you've wondered why the pain won't end, why people keep leaving, why nothing seems to stick. But let me ask you this. What if your heartbreak was a doorway? What if your pain was a passport to purpose? Steel is only forged through fire. Diamonds only emerge through pressure. Crowns aren't handed out in comfort. They're forged in darkness, in silence, in solitude. And just like me, you're not being destroyed. You're being rebuilt, stronger, wiser, deeper. The truth is, every scar you carry holds a story, not of defeat, but of survival. Every tear you've cried was watering something sacred beneath the surface. Every delay was divine. And now, you're rising, not because life got easier, but because you got stronger, more grounded, more aware of who you are and whose you are. So if you're walking through a season that feels like the end, I want you to hear this. You are not broken. You are being rebuilt. And pain didn't break you. It crowned you. Wear that crown, even if it still feels heavy, because you earned it in silence, and heaven took note of every moment you didn't quit. I used to believe that rejection was personal, that it meant something was wrong with me. One moment in particular still sticks with me. I had spent months preparing for a job opportunity at a nonprofit I deeply respected. The role aligned perfectly with my passion and experience. I had visualized myself there, prayed over it, told my friends, even started mentally preparing to move across the country, 2,200 miles from home. The final interview went great. I thought it was a done deal, and then the email came. "Thank you for your time. We've decided to go in a different direction." I reread that line at least 10 times. I sat in my apartment staring at my suitcase, which I had already half-packed, feeling like the wind had been knocked out of me. It wasn't just disappointment, it was disorientation. God, why would you let me get that far, just to shut the door in my face? I didn't understand it then, but I do now, because just 3 weeks later, I was asked to join a local community outreach team I hadn't even applied for. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't what I thought I wanted, but it became the place where I truly came alive. That smaller opportunity ended up introducing me to people I now call family. It taught me how to lead with humility, how to speak with clarity, and how to serve without needing applause. That no I once resented, it was really a divine reroute. Let me tell you something I wish someone had told me back then. Rejection isn't proof you're not worthy. Sometimes it's proof you were aiming too low. Sometimes God closes doors not to punish you, but to protect you. He sees what you can't. He hears conversations behind closed doors. He knows where that path would have led. And sometimes, mercy looks like closed opportunities. Maybe you've felt this too. Maybe you gave your all to something, a relationship, a business, a dream, only to watch it slip through your hands. And maybe you thought that was the end. But what if it wasn't rejection at all? What if it was redirection? What if the closed door didn't mean failure, but favor? You see, when you're chosen, your life isn't random. Your steps are ordered, even the detours, even the disappointments. So instead of asking, why didn't it work out? Maybe ask, what was I being saved from? Because trust me, sometimes the door that didn't open would have led to a room where your soul would have slowly withered. Sometimes that person who left didn't just break your heart, they made space for your healing. Sometimes that lost opportunity was never really yours. It was just a mirror showing you what you thought you needed. The truth, you didn't lose anything that was meant for you. And what's ahead, what is meant for you, won't require begging, forcing, or over-explaining. It'll fit, it'll flow, it'll feel like peace, not performance. So take a deep breath. Grieve if you need to, but don't chase what walked away, because rejection didn't destroy you. It delivered you. And that door didn't close because you weren't enough. It closed because you were too important to walk through it. You've probably felt it for years, that quiet sense that you just don't fit. You walk into rooms and feel everything. You sense the energy shift before anyone says a word. You've tried to blend in, tried to shrink yourself, tried to make people comfortable around you. But deep down, something in you always whispered, you're not like them. And maybe you thought that was a flaw. Maybe they told you you were too much, too sensitive, too intense, too deep. But here's the truth they never told you. You are not ordinary. You are set apart. You carry something rare, something not everyone will understand. Think about it. No one hides junk in a vault. We only guard what's valuable. Diamonds are buried deep for a reason. Crowns aren't placed on just anyone's head. They're reserved for the chosen, for the called, for the ones who can carry weight with grace, and that's you. That's why some doors didn't open. That's why certain people couldn't stay. That's why you've always felt like an outlier in a world obsessed with belonging. Because you weren't meant to fit. You were meant to stand apart. You weren't created to be palatable. You were created to carry presence, and presence always disrupts the status quo. It stirs the atmosphere. It exposes the fake. It makes small-minded people feel uncomfortable. Not because you're wrong, but because your light reveals the shadows they've learned to live with. Yes, it's lonely sometimes. Yes, it's heavy. Yes, it's easier to doubt yourself than to keep carrying this mantle. But can I remind you of something? You're not too much. You're not broken. You're not strange. You're precisely what this moment in history needs. You were born for such a time as this, to speak what others are afraid to say, to stand when others bow, to feel when others numb out, to build when others tear down. Your difference is not a burden, it's your blueprint. So stop apologizing for who you are. Stop asking for permission to shine. Stop trying to convince people of your worth, because those who can't see it were never meant to carry it. You are not too much. You are exactly what this world needs. Stand tall. Shine anyway. And never forget, you were set apart for something sacred. I didn't notice it at first. When I started healing, growing, setting boundaries, there was this quiet shift in the room whenever I walked in. People who once called me family grew distant. The phone stopped ringing. The group chats got quiet. I thought maybe I'd done something wrong, but I hadn't. I had just stopped apologizing for evolving, and when you stop shrinking, it triggers people who were only comfortable around your smallness. Have you noticed that? How they start acting weird when you're no longer struggling. How the smiles get tighter when you speak with confidence. How they cheer louder for strangers than they ever did for you. Let me be clear. That's not a reflection of your failure. That's a reflection of your favor. Jealousy doesn't show up when you're losing. It shows up when you're rising. When you walk with peace that you didn't beg for. When doors open that you didn't force. When you heal out loud and stop hiding your light. People notice. And not everyone can handle it. But here's the thing. You weren't made to be liked. You were made to be legendary. You weren't called to blend in. You were born to stand out. And standing out often means standing alone. You'll be misunderstood, talked about, labeled as arrogant when really, you're just finally confident. You'll be accused of being too much, when in reality, they just weren't enough to match your growth. But that's okay. Let them talk. Let them misread your rise, because their opinions don't fund your purpose, and their discomfort is not your responsibility. You see, chosen ones don't chase approval. They walk in alignment. They don't audition for seats at tables. They build their own. And you? You're done trying to be digestible for people who never had the capacity to handle your calling. So walk boldly. Glow without guilt. Rise without rehearsing. Because every time they whisper about you behind your back, they're confirming what heaven already knew. You were never meant to be liked. You were born to make history. Let the world adjust to your light. You don't have to dim it anymore. There was a season in my life when it felt like God had muted everything. No open doors, no answered prayers, no confirmation, no signs, no voice, just silence. And not the peaceful kind of silence. This was the deafening kind. The kind that made me question if I'd done something wrong. I kept showing up, I kept praying, I kept obeying. But it felt like I was shouting into a canyon, hoping something, anything, would echo back. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed at 3:12 a.m. whispering through tears, "Did you forget me?" But what I didn't realize back then was that Silence doesn't mean absence, it often means strategy. See, the world glorifies noise, achievements, announcements, hustle. But God does his deepest work in the quiet, when no one's watching, when no one's clapping. When you're hidden, not to be forgotten, but to be fortified. Think about it. Every warrior trains in private before they're released into battle. Every tree grows roots in darkness before it breaks the surface. Every storm gathers power in stillness before it strikes. You are no different. If you're walking through a silent season right now, where it feels like nothing's moving, no one sees you, and you're questioning your worth, I want you to hear me clearly. You're not being punished. You're being prepared. The silence isn't rejection. It's a setup. It's the space where your faith grows legs. It's where your identity is refined, not by applause, but by alignment. Because when it's time to be revealed, you won't just appear, you'll be announced. You won't whisper, you'll command. You won't walk in unsure. You'll move like someone who's been built in fire. So don't curse the quiet. Use it. Sit with it. Let it stretch you. Let it teach you. Let it strengthen the parts of you that need to be unshakable before the next door opens. Because this stillness, it's not the end. You're not stuck. You're being strengthened in silence. And when the time is right, your voice will return with power. Not because you forced it, but because it was refined in the dark. For a long time, I thought something was wrong with me. I noticed things other people didn't. The shift in someone's tone before their words turned sharp. The heaviness in a room before anyone spoke. The fake smile behind a, "How are you?" I could feel when something wasn't right, even if no one else could explain it. And every time I brought it up, I heard the same responses. "You're just overthinking. You're too sensitive. Stop being so dramatic." So I tried to turn it off. I told myself to toughen up, to be more normal. I ignored my gut and followed the crowd. And you know what happened? I lost myself. Because when you mute your discernment to make others comfortable, you don't become more accepted. You just become more empty. It wasn't until years later, sitting in a Bible study group, that someone looked at me and said, "You don't just feel deeply, you discern deeply." That's not a flaw. That's a gift. And something in me clicked. I wasn't crazy. I was called. Maybe you've felt this too. Maybe you've always seen beyond the surface. You walk into a space and instantly feel what others can't explain. You pick up on motives, on energy, on truth that no one is saying out loud. And because of that, you've often felt like an outsider. But here's what I've learned. What feels like isolation is often protection. What feels like too much is actually the exact amount needed to break cycles. You weren't meant to blend in. You were gifted to see beyond, to call out what others ignore, to discern what others dismiss, to protect what others play with. Yes, it can be lonely. Yes, people may not understand you. Yes, you'll sometimes wish you didn't know as much as you do. But don't despise your sensitivity. It's how heaven speaks to you. Don't bury your intuition. It's how God warns and leads you. And don't let a world addicted to surface level tell you that your depth is a defect. You are not too much. You are just enough for the assignment on your life. So stop hiding. You're knowing. Stop silencing your spirit. And stop shrinking your sight to fit into blind spaces. Because you don't just see differently. You were created to see ahead. You carry what others cannot see. And that is exactly why you're needed. Let's be honest, sometimes it feels like you're under attack for no reason. You try to walk with integrity and still they talk behind your back. You show up with love, and somehow it gets twisted. You choose peace, and people call you passive. You speak truth, and suddenly you're too much. But here's what they don't tell you. People rarely throw stones at things that aren't shining. You're not being attacked because you're weak. You're being attacked because you're dangerous to everything fake, shallow, and manipulated. There's something about your presence that disturbs systems built on control. You see too much. You carry too much. You walk into a room and things shift. Not because you're loud, but because your light speaks before you do, and light, by its very nature, exposes. It exposes what people have worked hard to hide. It exposes lies wrapped in pretty language. It exposes insecurity in those who've mastered image but not identity, just like Daniel. He didn't stir up trouble. He wasn't flashy, but his favor was loud. And favor like that? It makes kings take notice. And snakes too. You're not fighting because you've done something wrong. You're fighting because heaven marked you for something right. The opposition is proof of the oil you carry. The resistance is confirmation that your calling is active. The attacks aren't random. They're reactionary. They're not fighting the person you are. They're terrified of who you're becoming. You were never meant to live a small, unbothered life. You were born to disrupt, to challenge systems, to expose darkness just by standing in your truth. So don't take the resistance personally. Take it as a sign that you're on the right path. You're not paranoid. You're precise. You're not dramatic. You're discerning. And the more grounded you become, the louder your spirit gets, without you saying a word. Let them talk. Let them assume. Let them misunderstand. Your power doesn't need defending. It needs protecting. Because when God sets you apart, not everyone gets access. And the people who come against you now, they're not your problem to solve. They're your confirmation. The opposition isn't a curse, it's a crown. And if the attacks feel intense right now, it's probably because what you're carrying is about to change more than just your life. It's about to shift everything around you. There was a time when I almost quit, because life just didn't seem fair. I watched people lie, cheat, manipulate, and still win. I saw doors open for others who didn't work as hard, who didn't sacrifice, who didn't carry half the weight I did. And I started asking, God, what's the point of doing things the right way if it never gets me ahead? It felt like justice had skipped me, like the system was rigged, like favor was for the flashy, not the faithful. But then one night, sitting alone with nothing but my Bible and a broken heart, I heard something in my spirit that changed everything. Fairness is not the metric I use. Favor is. That moment shifted me. Because here's what I've learned. God's economy doesn't operate on human math. It doesn't reward the loudest voice or the prettiest resume. It doesn't wait its turn or follow formulas. It moves on alignment, obedience and timing, and sometimes that timing looks unfair. You may feel like you're being overlooked, passed over, forgotten. But favor isn't fair, and it's not supposed to be. So stop looking around, comparing your lane to theirs. Stop asking why it's taking so long or why they seem ahead. You weren't called to make sense to this world. You were called to make history. And history makers don't always rise according to the schedule. They rise by divine appointment. So, if you're in a season where things feel unjust, where the path looks uneven, where life isn't adding up, don't lose heart. Because you don't need fairness. You need faith. And if God chose you, then your outcome is already written, and no imbalance in this world can stop what heaven has ordained. You weren't chosen to make sense. You were chosen to make history. You've walked through the fire. You've cried in the dark, screamed into pillows, and sat in rooms where no one understood what you were carrying. You've been overlooked, underestimated, misunderstood, and still, you stayed standing. You've endured seasons of silence, watched people walk away, prayed for doors that never opened, and wondered if you were even seen. But through it all, something deeper was happening. You weren't being punished. You were being prepared. Prepared to carry what others could not. Prepared to walk where others could not follow. Prepared to speak when others chose silence. Prepared to rise, not for applause, but for assignment. Every detour, delay, disappointment, it was all part of the shaping. Every loss was really a redirection. Every lonely night was a classroom. And now it's time. This isn't your practice round. This isn't a coincidence. This moment, the one you're standing in right now, was written for you. You're Not the same person you were before. You've got fire in your bones, wisdom in your scars, and heaven at your back. So don't shrink. Don't apologize. Don't wait for permission. Step fully into who you were born to be. Speak the truth you once hid. Take up the space you once gave away. Walk like someone who knows they're covered. Because you are. You were never random. You were always marked for more. And now, it's your move.